Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie,
And I'm Jay.
and you're joining us for the latest episode of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're chatting about the Nintendo 64. It's the second episode in our series where I'm in the den of retro tech that is Jay's place. And so we're going to go through Nintendo 64, Jay's memories of his console at the time and the various games he played. Before we get into that, though, Jay, what piqued your interest this week?
So again, if you listen to our episode around handheld gaming, you'll know that this last couple of weeks for me has been dominated by my big looming 40th birthday.
Happy birthday again.
Thank you very much. And this time, I wanted to just talk a little bit about a video that I reflected on from, it's got to be at least 15 years ago, maybe more, which was something that really stuck with me at the time. And it was a Stanford University address delivered in 2005 by Steve Jobs. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend anyone go and check it out. It's absolutely worth 15 minutes to inspire you. It's a really, really interesting, pretty simple structure. It just tells three simple stories, but they're really impactful. And if you're looking for kind of inspiration or something to give you some hope or guide you, I think it's really worth watching. And I wanted to talk about it because it's recently inspired me to do something that I've waited 15 years to do, which was to have part of his talk, the quote that he leaves the address with, tattooed on my body. So I had it done this week. I'm not going to show it to camera particularly easily for those on YouTube. It's kind of on the forearm. You can kind of broadly see it, I think, there. And it was the final address. And it was "Stay hungry, stay foolish." And out of context, that doesn't really mean a lot. So I would implore people to go and watch the link. We'll put it in the show notes. But it's something that's stuck with me ever since I watched it 15 years ago. It's been something that I have tried to, I wouldn't say live by every day. That sounds a little bit too serious. It's not something that I literally think about every day, although now it will be. But it was something that I wanted to mark that sort of 40th year with, because I thought it was important going into, what is officially the second half of my life, reminding myself to do exactly that, to stay hungry and to stay foolish, to not settle and to try new things, have new experiences and have fun. That's how I read that quote. So I wanted to share that with you and to encourage everyone who hasn't seen it, or if you have seen it, but it was a while ago, to go back and rewatch it. So that was what piqued my interest this week.
That's a great interest this week, and it's a great quote. I can confirm I watched the video just before this, and it is excellent. So we'll include that in the notes. Highly recommend watching that as well. That was fantastic.
What piqued your interest, Robbie?
This week, so I saw in the news, our last episode we chatted a bit about Pokemon.
Is it as meaningful or as inspirational as a tattoo and a quote to live by?
I'm afraid it's not. Mine's going to be far more dull. Though, depending how excited you are about sleep and Pokemon.
They're not the two things that I often think about together, I'll be honest. But
there is someone out there that
give
does.
me a reason to think about them together then.
So, for those of you who've ever played Pokemon Go,
Mm-hmm.
that's the phone game where you can go around. It's augmented reality as well, so you can walk around and hunt out Pokemon and add them to your collection, catch them, and trade with friends. And it's very geographically based, so you walk around to different sites and you find different Pokemon. They've got another version of this, which is focused entirely on your sleep. So you put the phone on your pillow just before you go to sleep, or on the mattress, and it tracks how long you sleep for, and it gives you a little Snorlax kind of thing as you're doing it.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be the more sleep you get, the more points you get. And I can't tell from the article if it's supposed to integrate with Pokemon Go or if it's a kind of a separate kind of app that's a bit of an add-on.
I saw this.
You did.
I didn't read too much into it, so I'll be honest. My knowledge it sounds like as limited as yours in terms of the depth that it goes. I think there's a gadget that they're releasing as well.
Yes, so that as far as I can tell is called
Do you need that in order for this to work?
You don't. I think you can do your phone, but it says Pokemon Go Plus, and then a plus icon. So they've got double plus.
It's genuinely the plus plus. Do you know why?
Why?
Because the Pokemon Go Plus was already a device.
Oh, right.
Effectively, it was a walking aid. that allowed you that you take with you when you play the game.
Yeah.
And you could kind of auto capture Pokemon, so it would vibrate if there was a Pokemon near you. You didn't have to get your phone out, and then you could capture it. That's what it did.
Very clever.
So they've creatively named the newest gadget the Plus Plus.
Yes.
Because presumably it still does all those things, but it now does the sleep stuff you've talked about.
I guess so. So that instead of putting your phone on your mattress to track your sleep, you put this little device on your mattress to track your sleep. And I think it's a really interesting way of gamifying getting enough sleep. Sleep technology and sleep science has become a massive thing over the last few years as we're learning more about it. And this is another way for people to get into it. Kind of the interesting... the Pokemon are going into that almost health space as they did with Pokemon Go, encouraging people to get out and start walking.
Yeah.
But this is encouraging people to sleep as much as you can to gain as many points.
And there were a whole load of really positive stories around Pokemon Go. I remember back in the day of people who'd lost weight and were gaining fitness and had met other people through the journey. There's also a lot of people that cheat and use VPNs to teleport their devices to various places around the world to capture exotic Pokemon, but that's besides the point. I also noticed when I watched the very brief video of this, I turned it off because I must admit I got 30 seconds in and went, that's not for me. That apparently the Pokemon Go Plus Plus also will sing you lullabies, but more importantly, Pikachu will sing you a lullaby. So it's Pikachu's tones and I guess limited vocab of Pikachu singing you to sleep.
Just what everyone needs.
Yeah, so if you want to fall asleep to Pikachu, you can do that as well.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that's what piqued my interest this week. I thought it was a cool new thing brought out by Pokemon.
I'm blown away that because Pokemon Go's got to be now getting on for 4 or 5 years old, maybe more.
Oh, probably longer than that.
Got to be more than that, hasn't it? That it's still as popular as it seems to be.
I've got friends who still play it to this day.
I've got a friend who still plays it and I played it a lot and probably put a reasonable amount of money into Pokeballs in the early days. Not crazy amounts. But yeah, I know people who are still playing it. I don't. That's not a slight on the game. I just don't have the sort of group to play with. And I know they've added a lot to it since I probably stopped, in fact. I think they added battles and all sorts of stuff. I did see some negative stuff around Pokemon Go in the news. Did you see this?
No, I didn't.
So apparently, and again, I don't know all the details. This is kind of just from memory. There was Pokemon Go, the company behind it, Niantic, were discouraging players from entering a public park who hadn't got some sort of £30, I think it was £30, invite or pass to some sort of Pokemon Go event.
Right.
In order to allow for all the people that had paid for this event to turn up and go. So they were discouraging people from going to a free public place if you hadn't purchased this pass that they had for the game.
To make room for everyone else.
I assume so. I didn't read the full article, but that just seemed a little bit negative to me. But I read it and went, oh God, people are still playing this. Like there's that bigger community around it, which is fantastic that it's been going that long. I dread to think how much money they've made off that.
Yeah, it was a very popular game. Very popular.
Incredible. Cool.
Well, there you go. That was piqued my interest this week. So, getting to today's episode, we're chatting about the Nintendo 64 and Jay's experience growing up with the console and the various games he played. So this is going to be a bit more of an interview format. I don't know much at all about this console. It was kind of before my time. So
rub it in.
Just to rub it in, yeah. So it's going to be a bit of a learner experience for me. So I'm going to ask you, I suppose, starting with your memories of getting the console and what that meant to you at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had it for Christmas. Well, I say me and my brother had it as a joint Christmas present. It was something we were super excited to receive. I think we had it the year it was released, but I can't say for sure, which I think we agreed was 1996. 96?
I said
Did you say
1993. 1996. You're right. Completely
okay.
down.
So there you go. My memory is better than I gave it credit for. So, I had it 1990. I'm assuming 96. I think the Christmas of. If not, it was the following Christmas, but I'm pretty confident I had it the year it came out, as did some friends of mine. And it was something we were all really excited to get our hands on. It was, at the time, the first 4-player ready console that we had.
Yeah.
So, famously 4 ports on the front, very multiplayer focused. This was pre-online gaming, so, it was... Multiplayer was couch co-op, it was get around the TV screen together, split screen gaming, and the N64 did that incredibly well. It was a console that, for Nintendo, was the first leap to 3D. So I remember watching the trailers for Mario 64, which is running in the background, albeit a little bit bit weird due to the frame rates of the TV and the camera, but you broadly see that. It was the first time I'd ever seen Mario in 3D, and you'd been able to control him in that environment, and I was blown away. Like, just watching the trailers. A friend of mine had bought it on release out of his own money, and he brought it into school. His dad was the IT teacher at the time, and he plugged it into the TV that was in the sort of, there was a weird in-between room between the two IT rooms.
Right.
I can't remember how to describe it, but it's like the teacher's space. But because it was his dad, we got to go in there. And he got this thing plugged in, and he was trying to video record some of the footage back on a cassette. This is how old it is. VHS. And he was just sort of showing me the level where you first fight Bowser very early in the game, grabbing him by his tail, spinning him round.
Yeah.
I was just like, whoa, this is next level. I hadn't got a PlayStation at the time. I know that there were sort of, I can't remember the exact release dates, but it was there and thereabouts. So I was going from, I'm guessing, the Super Nintendo to this.
Yeah.
And that leap was like
Massive.
mind-blowing. I would have been in senior school, about midway through senior school when it came out. We had it for that Christmas. I think from memory we had it with Mario 64, and that version running behind me is my Nintendo from my youth. It is the original game I had. And this controller, which for those who are watching on the video, is also my original controller. It still has a reasonably tight analog stick, something that many of them would go on to fail on.
Impressive. Did you play a lot of it? I imagine.
I played a lot, yeah. So I'm blown
out.
away. It still works, to be honest, as well as it does. And I was always very much a purist. Still am when it comes to console hardware. So we had third-party controllers because they were cheaper for our parents to buy, but I did not like them. So I was adamant. I was always player one. I was the older brother. I always had the grey controller. So that was my controller, and I just remember having that Mario 64, I think Mario Kart 64 and GoldenEye. That's the memory. Now, that may be wrong if those release dates don't align. But I'm pretty confident those were the games I had, and if that places it at the following Christmas, then I might have got my Christmases wrong. But those are the games I had at the start, and I just remember thinking this thing was bonkers. I mean, the controller's got kind of these three grips for different, and they were designed for different types of play.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, what you would normally do, so just for those who haven't seen one or want a reminder, the N64 controller looks a bit like the letter M, actually, if you're kind of looking at it.
Yeah.
And you've got the D-pad in the sort of upper left corner, the analog stick nestled in the middle of the sort of central grip, and then you've got an A and B button, and then these 4 directional C buttons, which were literally C up, C down, C left, C right. A start button smack bang in the middle, a trigger on the top left and right, and then a sneaky little trigger, which was classified as the Z trigger, in the middle behind the central stick.
That's an awful lot of buttons.
It is, and it's a bit of a weird layout by modern standards. But your C buttons for many games would later translate to the right analog stick.
Yeah.
That's how they ended up becoming. But I guess for whatever reason at the time, technology didn't allow for that, or it was too expensive. Most of the games would encourage you to hold the controller by the middle grip.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of
Almost
showing
like
that for the camera's purposes.
like a joystick.
Yeah, so you'd
like
hold
a
that
thumb
middle
joystick.
grip, and then you'd hold the right-hand side for the buttons. You'd very rarely use the D-pad. Most games didn't really do much with that, which was a weird transition because obviously the analog really was required for the 3D environments you were now operating in,
Yeah.
whereas the D-pad was more of a throwback to the old ways. There were a few games that used it, but actually by the time you used it, and it's not the most sort of tactile D-pad, it was a bit tough to use. I don't know if you want to have a little handle of that
absolutely.
while we're talking, but so you never experienced the Nintendo 64?
I didn't. It's not a console that I ever had. Though I was at a arcade bar recently, and I did play a couple of games on there. I think we played the original Mario Kart that was on this console, and Smash Bros as well was another one that we
Yes, yeah. So that's an interesting one we're not going to be talking about today
played.
because it isn't in my little tray of games. So again, just for the purposes of video, and I'm sorry again, this is going to be one that's probably better suited to YouTube, but a lot of it's going to be stories. I've got a little tray here with some of, but not the entire collection of games that we're going to work through. For me, I never had Smash Brothers on the N64. I played it.
Yeah.
A friend of mine had it. Smash Brothers wasn't a thing for me until the GameCube.
Okay.
And then I was well in on Melee. So yeah, I played a lot of that on the GameCube, but not really on the N64.
Yeah.
But you're right, that was the sort of the birthplace of Smash Brothers. So yeah, and we've got Mario 64 up on screen. So I guess I'll start there in terms of games. I love Mario 64. I'm not sure I ever completed it. That's true for me of most games, though. I do get bored and tend to move on. And,
Yeah.
and as I said, my experiences
very similar, to be honest.
with the N64 were very much anchored in multiplayer. So
Yeah.
where I spent the bulk of the hours were multiplayer games, and Mario 64 obviously not falling into that category. Loved it though. I still put plenty of time into it. I pretty much know the first opening level inside and out, and I still play it to this day and enjoy it. I'll put that level on, just have a little blast. And it's the level with for those who remember the console, you basically made your way up. It was a very small level in hindsight, but you made your way over a couple of small bridges and then up the side of I'm not going to call it a castle, it was just a mound, but part of the way down that mound were these balls that would roll down, kind of Indiana Jones style, come at you, and you had to dodge them. And I remember just thinking that was epic. I just thought that, and it's silly now looking back on it, but at that time, the scale, the feeling of the size of those balls, they kind of roll towards you and having to navigate Mario around them, and the freedom that came with that the full 3D environment was just mind blowing.
And was there anything else to compare it against at the time? Was that really the only one that was doing the 3D stuff?
Not really. I think the PlayStation obviously followed suit and became fully 3D. But Nintendo were at the forefront with the console, and obviously the brand at that time. I was still kind of on the hook for the Nintendo stuff. I was getting ready to sort of grow out of it, to be honest. And the PlayStation, PS1 missed me for the first few years. I was very much in the N64,
and that's about the same era, isn't it? The PS1.
Yeah, it would have been. It would have been the PS1. I didn't go to until much later in the generation. Got really into some of the games, but they were platinum at that time. Things like Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, Gran Turismo. I loved them. Really got engrossed in them, and that kind of matured me, I think, from a gaming point of view, and readied me for the PS2, which became a massive part of my late teens and 20s. But I was still very much in senior school an N64 guy, and that was because a lot of my friends were also on it. And we'll talk about some of those multiplayer memories and experiences, but I had a blast with the N64 and many, many fond memories. In terms of how we're going to go about doing this, I think we're going to do a bit of random select, aren't we? So there's no direction here when it comes to the games. You're going to pluck it.
I'm just going to pluck a random game, and you're going to tell me a bit more about it. Oh, there's one that I spot that I do want to speak about, because I think I do remember playing this one.
Okay, yeah.
And this is the 007 GoldenEye.
I mean, what is there to say about this classic? This was one of the games that absorbed many, 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 many hours as a kid. So I'll start with the single player element. So if you haven't played this, by the way, and you've got an Xbox or a Nintendo Switch, you can now play this, the remastered version.
Oh, cool.
So it's now readily available on, I think, Game Pass and on Nintendo Switch Online. So well worth a look. Although it probably feels a bit clunky these days. So this one's a weird one because this used the analog stick and the C buttons. So 3D first-person shooter, but with one analog stick. So even dual analog probably was a strange concept to a keyboard and mouse guy. But one analog stick and these C buttons. Actually, maybe that was less weird. I don't know. Maybe that's probably feels more normal to a PC player.
More buttons and less analog.
And the C buttons in this game were used for strafing and kind of movement and looking up and down. Maybe, can't remember. But this was a great game. I can again vividly remember the first few levels. The music is iconic.
Yeah.
The watch screen, the pause screen, when your character would look at his watch and kind of observe his health and his shield, and then you've got your options. Again,
look at that now as well, just as you raise your Apple Watch. In the game.
Well, we're nearly there now, aren't we? Yeah. That was iconic. But multiplayer is where this game really ground through the hours for me. So I had a friend who unlocked every cheat in this game. So there were some fantastic cheats available in GoldenEye, like Big Head mode, Paintball mode, lots of other stuff. And he unlocked all of those by doing the various degrees of difficulty challenges across each of the levels in the single player. And he was brilliant at the single player. He was like a speedrunner, but he was useless at multiplayer. We'd play together as a four, there was a core group of us, but then we'd often have friends kind of come and go, and we would spend hours and hours on the different maps, the complex level, and we'd like the golden gun mode. You'd have slaps only. That was a good fun one. You'd run just frantically slapping at each other, with proximity mines and all sorts of weird variations. I guess a lot of people were probably doing that in a more mature way on things like Quake.
Yes, actually, that kind of arena style game.
Yeah, but that wasn't really something that console players had got experience of. So GoldenEye was the first one of those for me.
Yeah.
So huge number of hours. I remember, of course, you could only play it split screen, so probably feels a bit weird now playing an online shooter split screen because one quick glance and you could very easily see where your mates were. So there was that kind of
Screen
you know,
cheat, we used
yeah.
to call that playing.
You're watching your friends going, you just looked at the screen. Yeah, how did you know I was
No.
hiding in that vent, or hiding behind that door? And you'd have to try and make sure not to look, and you'd try and strongly focus on your own screen. But yeah, we would play varieties of that over and over again. I do remember No Odd Job. That was often a stipulation, No Odd Job, because Odd Job was a character that was half the size of everybody else.
Right.
So you couldn't headshot him.
Oh.
So he was very hard to hit. So
Okay.
yeah, things like that were a lot of fun. So yeah, I GoldenEye, absolute classic, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's not a sleeper. Everybody who owned an N64, I would have thought, would have owned GoldenEye. It was almost that sort of. It had to have that kind of attach rate, I would have thought.
I do actually remember. Again, I didn't have the console, but I think at like friend's house, or if ever there was some kind of arcade or anything like that we could play it. I think they might have had the consoles there as well. I do remember playing that game and thinking it was amazing for kind of playing against your friends with the split screen. It was fantastic.
Okay.
Okay.
Look at it. Random select. What's next?
Random select
We
one.
should probably take the ones out that we're doing, otherwise we're going to end up picking.
I'll remember that one.
Well, we'll put it down. Let's chuck it down.
Okay.
Pop it
So
on the floor.
Mario Kart 64.
Oh, you're picking all the classics. These were the this was the other staple. So when my group would get together, Mario Kart 64 and GoldenEye, and then one other we'll come to, were the ones we would often flip between.
Yeah.
Mario Kart 64 would always get a good look in. It's the second in the series, so Mario Kart 64 was the second in the franchise. But for me, it's the one I'm most fond of. So
Yeah.
I put a lot of hours into the Super Nintendo one with my brother growing up. But because, again, of the 4-player experience, the memories with friends, the split screen, and just the sheer sort of balance of that game. Not the ones that have followed were bad by any stretch. Mario Kart's always been a popular one for me, but that just had... It came at the right time where I could spend a number of hours mastering it and getting really good at it. To the point where, again, we would have friends who would learn some of the exploits on some of the tracks.
Yeah.
And if you hit a certain point in a track, you could almost glitch it and get halfway around the track
Yeah.
really quickly, as long as you had the right conditions. So you needed things like a mushroom or whatever it be to sort of hit it. All those kind of things played into it. We were serious about that game. Really serious about Mario Kart 64.
I do like where it's developed as well, and it's now like an official speed run kind of competition. People compete all over the world for it. I actually watched the Yogs cast on Twitch doing their speed runs. They've done it a couple of times now, and as you say, the exploits and the maps where you jump across and you just learn them off by heart, and the little tricks to get faster. I was never ever that good, but I can see how you could obsess quite easily over a game like this and get amazing.
I've never recaptured that level of involvement either. So I've enjoyed games that followed. So Double Dash on the GameCube, and then I think it was Mario Kart Wii, and it's probably some I've missed. And then of course Mario Kart 8, which then jumped from the Wii U to the Switch and became almost the deluxe and definitive Mario Kart. For me, that was the game that I had the time to invest in getting to that level of good.
Yeah.
Now I'm still good at Mario Kart, but I'm not competitive good. Whereas back then, I'd have given anyone a go on Mario Kart, and of course the other thing was the characters. So it would be a bum rush to get to the certain characters that were known to be the fastest. So like Yoshi and Toad, the Koopa Trooper. If you grab those first, you were in for a good shout. If you got lumbered with Mario or even Bowser or worse, often you'd have to pick those as punishment, or you'd use those if you were playing with friends who weren't as good as you. You'd pick one of the less speedy characters to give someone a chance. Just a great game. And it's one of those where I hear that music, it's iconic, and the nostalgia takes you straight back to your youth.
Excellent.
Love it. Absolutely love that one.
A classic Mario Kart.
They do get more obscure than these, although I will say it's not the most obscure. You've done it again. It's not the most obscure collection, and I should say I am not a collector looking to complete a set of any of these games or any of these consoles. What I have behind me in the screen here and in various cupboards around the room are the games that I loved or that I remember, not the games, not necessarily the complete set of any one console. So there will be a lot of mainstream stuff in here, but there's some weird ones as well.
So the next one I've selected, trying to pick the indie, the niche ones, we've gone for Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Okay, another absolute mainstream Nintendo. So this is, arguably, but for many people, it's considered one of, if not the best game ever made. It has numerous 10 out of 10s across the board on most critics' websites. I remember this game fondly. I had it again. It was at Christmas, but not the same not the same Christmas. And I had it at the same time randomly as Fatboy Slim's album.
Is that how you remember it?
It's really weird, but I did, because back in the day, in my bedroom, I had a small CRT TV, my N64 setup, and a little mini hi-fi. You know, like most people back in the day, you know, your cassette player, CD player, radio, like that was my little thing. So I went straight up to my room on Christmas Day, put in Zelda, put in the Fatboy Slim album.
Yeah.
So it's weird when I play that game, there are certain levels where I get to it and all I can hear is the Fatboy Slim. It's really weird. But yeah, great game. I needed a guide to finish it. I did finish it. But the later end of the game, I needed a guide to sort of help me through. Absolutely love Zelda. I haven't really played a Zelda game since. Not thoroughly. I did Wind Waker, got quite far through Wind Waker. But again, it's about that time investment at the time as a teenager.
Yeah.
Could come home from school, get the homework out of the way, straight on the N64, and you could just run it for hours. And then you get to your weekend, wake up, turn it on. You had nothing else to do. So you could put the hours in, and it was a great game.
You mentioned a guide to get through it. I mentioned on the previous episode, I watched a documentary on Nintendo, and they had their game coaches that you could call up as a service to get through the games. Was that available for the Nintendo 64, or was that earlier?
I think that predate. Yeah, I think that was more NES, maybe into Super Nintendo level. I think by this point, like the piggyback guides, and I used to love those, by the way. So a lot of nostalgia. I've got quite a few of them around the room. A lot of nostalgia for those player guides because they were beautifully printed. Yeah, they were like glorious to look at, and they were usually high quality material. They felt nice. I remember the Metal Gear Solid ones specifically, and a lot of the Final Fantasy ones, because quite often with a friend of mine, we would sit playing Final Fantasy games. He would do the doing, and I was comfortable with this. I still like doing this now. He would play, and I'd be flicking through the guide, helping him. This is the character,
pointing out the secret things.
Yeah. So always loved those things, and I do remember the Zelda one fondly. Just a brilliant game, just a real epic. At the time, it felt epic. You know, you'd get on Epona, you'd be bouncing along with your horse, going to these different dungeons, meeting these different characters in these different worlds, and this quest felt epic. It genuinely felt like a massive adventure. I'm sure now, in hindsight, it probably doesn't feel quite as grand. Yeah. As things have moved on a bit, but back then it was just mind blowing. Yeah. So
I have to say, I've never played any of the Zelda games.
Wow.
So I'm definitely missing out on that one. I've heard amazing things about this.
I mean, I think
mostly from you.
Yeah, I think you probably you can absolutely play that game. It stands up. Obviously, visually, it's not as pretty. I don't know if it's as immersive. There's some brilliant online people who are sort of trying to remake it in modern game engines.
Oh, really?
The visual fidelity they're achieving of the world, it's stunning. But I think if you want to jump into a Zelda game, that you really probably need to start with Breath of the Wild these days. Yeah. Because it's far surpassed what Zelda Ocarina of Time did back then. It has its flaws because it's a much faster game now and it's been measured against modern standards, but Ocarina of Time is still a great game.
Fantastic. Another classic. I'll try and pick an indie one.
See if you can pick something that's a bit...
I've seen something I don't recognise, so...
Oh, you'll know what it is when you read it out, though.
Killer Instinct. Gold.
Yeah, so this was a bit of a disappointment for me, actually. On the
oh, really? Yeah.
So I'm
glad I picked it.
Yeah, I was a massive Killer Instinct fan on the Super Nintendo and played a lot of the original on the arcade. And when we moved over to the N64, I was super excited when they announced this. This one, for me, fell foul of the controller. So this one used the D-pad. It just didn't feel very nice to play. It didn't feel as responsive as the Super Nintendo. It holds up. It's playable now. Yeah. But it did kill the franchise for quite a long time. There was nothing in the Killer Instinct series after Killer Instinct Gold until Microsoft rebooted it at the start of the Xbox One's life. So, it's quite a few generations on. GameCube got nothing. The Wii got nothing. The Wii U would have been about the Xbox One time, so I guess you could class it as having come back then, but many years went by. It was good. It's not as good for me as the original, but
I don't actually know much about the franchise. What kind of game is it?
It's a fighting game. So think sort of in the Mortal Kombat, sort of Street Fighter space.
Okay.
It's that sort of 2D fighting game. Very much based around combo-based fighting. So people who got really good at it would string together combos and just absolutely trash you without you getting to press a button. They could, and it would, it put massive emphasis.
I'm more of a button masher with those kind of games.
Yeah, and you could to an extent, but if you were playing someone who knew what they were doing,
you get slaughtered.
Like if you play Tekken and you button mash, you would probably get away with a few hits. You'll land a few blows. You won't on Killer Instinct. If someone knows what they're doing, and it's frightening and great to watch someone who's good at it. What I found was that gameplay didn't translate to what I think it feels like a bit of a slow control pad.
Yes.
The Nintendo 64 controller is not the most nimble, and being forced onto the D-pad didn't really work for me. So
I actually remember one thing, just going back to 007 GoldenEye, the moving was very slow on that. It was a good game, but moving generally was very slow. And so now, retrospectively, I wonder if that was the controller more than anything.
I don't know. I mean, or maybe even just the console not being able to keep up with what was going on, because it was early 3D, wasn't it? So who knows? But I remember moving, going back to the GoldenEye conversation, moving on to PS2 and playing Time Splitters, which was a fantastic game, but very much in the vein of and inspired by GoldenEye, I think.
Yes.
That felt much snappier and much more. That was the first time actually I forced myself to adopt dual analog sticks, because I was really resistant to it, because I struggled.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of retrained myself. But anyway, we moved off the topic.
But yes.
Killer Instinct Gold, I bought it. I must admit I didn't own it back in the day, so that's not an original one from my collection in my youth. I rented it back in the day, didn't like it, and didn't bother buying it. I bought it later in life for just a few quid, just because the series is one that meant something to me from the Super Nintendo, and I wanted to have it in there as it was a memory, but it wasn't great.
Cool. Okay, let's try and pick another weird one, shall we? Not popular. Here we go. Something that no one's ever heard of. Pokemon Stadium.
Okay, this is an interesting one, actually.
I tell a lie, I haven't actually heard of the Stadium version, to be fair.
Well, it brings into play this accessory that I'm, for camera-based people, holding up, the Nintendo Transfer Pack. So this little beaut came with Pokemon Stadium, and you plugged it into the back of your controller, and you could insert into it your Game Boy game. So you put your Pokemon game in, and then Pokemon Stadium would then read the game and allow you to bring your Pokemon into Pokemon Stadium to fight against your friends. So we had two of these in our house. One we came with the game, and one we bought separately. And me and my brother and our friends who would come over would dock their Game Boy games, because everyone had Pokemon.
Yep.
It would only work. This one only worked with red, yellow, and blue. I have got the sequel, Pokemon Stadium 2, which then brought in gold and silver. So this was for the original Pokemon games. So,
that's such a cool idea.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, so you can play Pokemon Stadium without the transfer packs, and you can use the generic Pokemon in the game.
Yeah.
But they have one moveset. They're all one consistent level. You know, you pick on the front there, you've got Blastoise and Charizard. If you chose them, you'd get the moveset predetermined in the game. But of course, if you play Pokemon, you know that you would pick and choose the moves that your Pokemon had based on its evolution and the time you spent with it and the level you'd got it to. And actually, the level that you reached and how you trained it would vary from person to person.
Yeah.
So my brother used an exploit to cheat on Pokemon Red, which
so he was amazing at Pokemon Stadium there.
No, this is the opposite. So he used, I think it was called the Rare Candy, and the Rare Candy was an instant level up.
Yeah.
And there was an exploit that would get you an unlimited number of Rare Candy. So rather than like spending the time to grind his characters up to level 100, which I'd done for 6 or 7 of mine to get a decent squad, he got the Rare Candy exploit and just dumped them all on his Pokemon.
Yeah.
The problem with the Rare Candy exploit was that your level ups were much less of a jump in terms of the skill set. So it was like it was a cheap nudge up a level, basically. So you get a small bump, but if you level them up properly, you got a better attack points, better defense. So the Rare Candy was kind of discouraged as something you'd use over and over. You just used it every so often for a quick level boost. So of course he'd pushed his Pokemon through 20 or 30 levels or more.
Yeah.
To 100 using these Rare Candies, and therefore his Pokemon were much weaker than mine.
Right.
So he'd put them into battle. We'd play on Pokemon Stadium, and mine would absolutely crush it because they'd got better moves, better stats, because I'd done it properly. So Pokemon Stadium was there were some mini games in there as well. They were forgettable, but it was really a way to bring your Pokemon into 3D, into colour, and into life in a way that you simply couldn't do before. Because even by Link battles, you were just fighting with your yellow screened Game Boy. Yeah. So that's what that is. You asked me about it earlier off camera. Yeah. Now you know what it is. It's It's the Game Boy Transfer Pack for Nintendo 64. That's really good.
Something I didn't know as well is that does that mean that the game saves were saved to the cartridge rather than the actual Game Boy itself?
Oh god, yeah, everything was on the cartridge back then. I didn't
realise that.
Which is the problem, because the Game Boy's internal memory is powered by like a watch battery.
Yeah.
So for a lot of those games now, those batteries have died, and your save game along with them, which is why my Pokemon are no longer present on my original cartridges because
Nightmare.
those batteries died. Yeah, so you have to take them apart and replace the battery to then be able to use. I mean, these things had like long life on them.
Yeah.
They were probably never supposed to still be being played
Yeah.
that long after the battery had died. And like I said, my brother's one still works. His Pokemon are still there.
Wow.
So it depends on your battery and
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a cool kind of cross-console. Probably one of the first as well, cross-consoles at the time, you'd have thought.
I mean,
I don't think if there was anything else between the handheld and the actual consoles themselves.
Yeah, I don't think there were many. And like I said, Pokemon Stadium 2 did very much the same thing. There is a Pokemon game on the GameCube, which I believe works in a similar way. But yeah, it was great. I loved it, Pokemon Stadium. I've still got the original box somewhere up there. There we go.
Nice.
Right behind me, somewhere up on the shelf.
And we chatted about it in the previous episode, but the Nintendo's accessories to their consoles, I think, are just wild.
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised to see something like this on the console, but it's still super impressive and super cool for the players.
And I'll be honest, it even feels nice to plug in the Nintendo 64, like sticking these accessories in. There's a nice satisfying kind of clunk
Yeah.
as they connect. They work really well, and we'll come on to another one in a minute. But
Excellent.
I say in a minute, whenever we reach the relevant game.
Another random one, should we choose?
There we go, and you've picked it. That's almost perfect.
There you go.
You couldn't have written that any better. Have you heard of
Lilac
this?
Wars? Is that what
Lilac Wars.
Lilac
yeah.
Wars.
So to anyone outside of Europe, they'll be like, "What the hell is Lilac Wars?" It's Star Fox 64,
Oh.
where as it's now known, like mostly across the world.
Oh, yeah, I can see a little fox.
Yeah, and
icon
then
on
you
the
can
top
see
right.
on the sticker there. You've got that's Fox's jet or plane or whatever you want
yeah.
to class it as. So Lilac Wars is how it was branded over here. Now
Very
by
blurry,
yeah, it's not working so well on the camera. By default, the Nintendo 64 controllers do not come with a rumble. Lilac Wars was one of the first games that came bundled, or you could buy it bundled with the rumble pack, which is this little fella here for those watching on camera. The rumble pack was again another accessory that plugged into the back of the controller. It takes batteries, so I think it's like a couple of AAAs from memory, yeah. And basically, it added rumble to your games. Now this worked on things like Mario 64, on GoldenEye and a number of other games, but it came bundled with Lilac Wars. That was the first play, and it was great because when you were playing and you plugged this in for the first time, you've got to try and imagine and roll back to a world where rumble wasn't something you had.
Yeah.
Like we've got HD rumble now, and we've got context sensitive triggers in the PS5 controller. You had none of that.
Yeah.
No controllers rumbled. PlayStation brought one out with rumble bedded in later in the PS1's life, I think. Certainly the PS2 had the DualShock. I can't remember if PS1's had that built in. But either way, this was one of the first times I'd ever experienced rumble. And it was brilliant because it just, it just added a level of immersion that had previously not been seen. So when you're fighting, you're flying your jet, you're fighting against the bad guys, these big bosses come out.
Yeah.
The rumble, the pad would just start to shake in your hand and it's going all over the place. And it was great. Limitations, the rumble pack is literally just a rumble pack. It doesn't do anything else. And we mentioned again prior to recording that the memory cards for your games went into the back of the controllers.
Right.
So now
So
you
it was one or the other.
Yeah, you didn't need that for saved games. So a lot of the cartridges again you could store your saves on.
Yeah.
It was more for where you had something that needed to move between consoles or that you might want to take with you to your friend's house, which we can talk about with one of the other games that's coming up shortly. But of course it meant hot swapping, so you have to take your rumble pack out, put your memory card in, do your save, take the memory card out, put your rumble pack back in, carry on playing. But yeah, the Lilac Wars game I always think of and remember, and I specifically remember getting mine. There was a second-hand game reseller near where we lived, and I remember going there. My friends had all bought it. I wasn't that bothered until I'd experienced it, and then I was like, oh god, I need that. And I scraped the money together through various means, went to this shop and paid a little bit over the odds for Lilac Wars with the rumble pack. Loved it. And like I said, then translates to various other games and experiences, but that was where I link, in my memory, rumble pack.
Do you think that was one of the first? Or is the first kind of rumble with a controller? Because now you play games and you can't imagine playing it without some kind of haptic feedback within the controller itself.
Exactly. I don't know if it's the first. I don't know where the PlayStation's timeline comes in. Theirs were baked into their controllers when it did come. So it makes me think this might well have come first. But it could also have been an afterthought, and they were like, God, how do we add that now? But it worked on games very early in the generation, so I don't know whether it was an afterthought. I don't know whether or not your game had to be programmed to pick it up, whether it was kind of sound based. I really
Yeah.
don't know how it worked. Never looked into it. Maybe I should. It might be quite interesting. But I just remember again being blown away by that. We ended up buying them separately. I ended up buying third-party ones that would bake the memory cards and the rumble together.
Ooh,
So I didn't.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, I didn't end up using the official Nintendo one for most of my gameplay. I ended up buying my separate one because that went everywhere with me.
Yeah.
My controller and my pad. You go to a friend's house, you plug in.
Yeah.
Very few of my friends, apart from one, had 4 controllers.
Yeah.
We'd often take ours with us and plug in. So your controller went with you wherever you went, basically. As did your games.
Another classic example of Nintendo doing accessories really well as well. It's amazing to me that they thought ahead in actually enabling future additions and accessories to actually add into the back of controllers and the consoles themselves. So that's definitely some future planning on their half.
Where do you want to go next?
I've seen one that I know you're going to be a huge fan of. So WCW versus NWO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
World
Tour. So it's a wrestling one.
It is wrestling one. So these arguably some of the, and still to this day, the best wrestling games ever made, in my opinion. And a lot of people actually will say the same, but they're probably of my generation. So WCW versus NWO World Tour was the first wrestling game I had for the N64. I wasn't a WCW fan. I didn't know much about them. I was a WWF fan, or WWE as they are now.
WWF, I played that when I was a kid as well.
But this game came out. I saw it. It was the sort of CEX equivalent of today. Again, it was kind of a sort of not your typical main street video game seller at the time. They were specialists. They had a lot of second-hand games, but this I bought brand new from them at full whack at the time. It was like £65. I remember buying this and being like, oh my god, that's a stretch. But I was super into it. Took it home, played it with my friends. We played obsessively on that game for hours at a time. And it was really weird because this was the first time that I'd really realised or understood that wrestlers kind of move between organisations.
Yeah.
Sounds really stupid, but when a WWE or WWF, whatever you prefer, wrestler left that organisation or just stopped being on TV,
Yeah.
I guess my brain didn't really understand that they were going off and working somewhere else.
Yeah. Just thought they retired.
So when these characters would appear somewhere else, I'd go, what the hell's going on? And on the cover for this game is Hulk Hogan as Hollywood Hulk Hogan,
Yeah.
which was his sort of like when he turned heel and became a bad guy.
The alter ego.
As well as Paul White, the Giant, or the Big Show, as he's now known.
Oh, the Big Show.
Yeah, but he was the Giant in that game. And there was a number of wrestlers, and you couldn't tell this because the character models were obviously pretty crap back in the day. But they'd have names, so like there was one in there called Six. And I was like, who's this Six guy? Later it turned out to be the 1, 2, 3 kid. And the reason he was called Six is because 1 + 2 + 3 is 6. So he was called Six in the new one. He came back then to be X-Pac as part of D-Generation X, and that story goes on. But there was loads of wrestlers in there who had left the organisation and gone to WCW and then made themselves famous. The NWO was like one of the most popular runs in WCW. So it was Hollywood Hulk Hogan. It was a guy called Diesel, who was then Kevin Nash. Razor Ramon, who in NWO was Scott Hall. And it was this big faction, basically. But
I knew you were a fan of wrestling, but wow, you're...
I'm into it. I won't go any further. But we played that to death. And it was the first game. I think it was THQ, yeah. Oops. It'll survive that bounce. THQ.
Another good thing about Nintendo 64, the cartridges were
But this was... there's an... I've not put them all in the box because there's too many of them, but this was superseded then by WCW versus NWO Revenge, which was kind of the sequel. More characters. That one got even more play from me and my friends, and that's where they started introducing belts. You could create a belt and keep it on your memory card, and then you could, if your friends won it, you could put it up in a match. If they won it, it would transfer to their memory card, and then it would tell you who the holder was, and then they could choose to defend it against you. It was really cool. And then this one is in there somewhere, but I'll just flick and find it because I think it's relevant. Oh no, did I leave it in there? Yes, I did. So THQ then pivoted. WWE, who were the bigger brand, realised how popular these games were, muscled in and went, please stop making those for WCW. You can have our characters, which are more iconic.
Yeah.
Do it for us. So the game is fundamentally the same. Like it plays the same engine, same style, look and feel, but it's the WWF wrestlers instead of the WCW franchise. And there's 2 games in the series. There was WrestleMania 2000, I think it was, and then the sort of final one, which was WWF No Mercy, which is the last game from THQ on the N64, roundly considered to be the best wrestling game ever made. by a lot of people. Interestingly, bit of modern day info for you. So at the moment, all of the wrestling games are made by 2K for WWE.
Yeah.
They've just had a really successful return to the franchise, having had some absolute nightmares on the last one. There's a new one coming out this year, which hopefully takes that a step further. But AEW are kind of the WCW of its time now. They're run by a guy called Tony Khan, who's a billionaire owner of Fulham Football Club.
Okay.
For you. And he's the THQ are doing a spiritual successor to No Mercy.
Oh, right.
Which is due out in a matter of weeks for AEW. So
we'll have to have a go of that.
Yeah, we'll have to have a go. And I think it's coming to Game Pass. So maybe.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
There we go. Have a little go on Twitch.
So yeah, interesting to see where that THQ and wrestling link has gone, but it is re-emerging, and they are calling it a spiritual successor, so it plays in a very similar way to those classics.
So WWF No Mercy, was that also on PlayStation at the time?
No, so there's a whole load of wrestling games that kind of were made for different consoles, but they were never the same. So this playstyle, this franchise, it was only ever on the N64.
Oh, okay.
There were other wrestling games running in parallel with other consoles, so you'd have things like, I think it was like SmackDown, Raw is War, Warzone, things like that on the PlayStation. And we dabbled with those, me and my brother, as kids, but we never really got into them in the same way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember playing WWF on the PlayStation with my brother. One of the first games before it was WWE. And I really enjoyed it. Great games. And that actually got me into wrestling at the time as well. I watched it on TV. I haven't not kept up to date with it as much as you have. You're an encyclopedia of wrestling knowledge, I think.
I've dipped back in recent years, but because there's obviously so much more content available now, and so many YouTubers kind of covering wrestling, it's really easy to dip into.
Isn't Logan Paul a wrestler now?
He is. Yeah, he will be at WrestleMania. What's interesting, I think, is that for me now, as an adult, recognizing that it's not real and spoiler, but it's peeking behind the curtain. It's finding out more about the business and how it works.
Yeah,
I find that really fascinating. So it's interesting to watch. And for all of it, it's fake. Oh, I know my dad used to give me a load of stick for this as a kid. He was the one who spoilt it actually and told me. Yeah, so thanks, Dad. But the thing for me is that, yes, I know it's fake, but it's real as in the physical toll it takes and the athleticism required to do it, and what these people will put themselves through for this entertainment. It's astonishing. And sort of seeing
it's almost harder, I think, because it's fake, because they have to be careful not to actually beat each other up.
It's a skill.
There's a lot of control, I think, in that kind of environment to look like you're beating someone up when you're not.
Yeah, well, and you see what they do to each other. I mean, some of them. There's some horror stories. Maybe this is for another day or another podcast, because we're not a wrestling podcast. But maybe I'll tell you a bit about it when I come back from WrestleMania, and we'll have a little dip into wrestling, maybe. But anyway, let's move on with the collection.
Right.
Oh, weird one.
This I don't recognize this at all. Is that Mace the Dark Age?
Yep, that's exactly right. So it's
got a 15 marking on it.
Yeah.
Were you 15 at the time?
I was 15 at the time, just about. It's a fighting game. Doesn't look like it should be, does it, based on the cover? It's got this very
it's a samurai.
Threatening dude in armour. He's not a samurai.
He's not?
No, he carries a mace and a big sword. That's a massive sword you can see in front of him.
Oh, yeah.
He's a big armoured dude. This was very similar to, in the mould of things like Soul Calibur.
Oh, yeah.
You had a variety of different fighting styles and characters, and it was a 3D fighting game. So instead of being bound to that 2D plane, you could move around in 3D.
Ooh, I was really struggled with games like that, because you just have to sidestep people,
especially with this controller. And you could knock people out of the arena. That was another way to get them out of the game.
Yep.
So if you could knock them off the arena, you won, or you could just beat them down with your moves. The reason I didn't have this as a kid, my friend owned this as a kid. But we played it quite a bit at his house when we kind of were dipping between games. So I rebought it as part of my collection because I remembered it very well. There's not a lot to say about this one. It's a bit of a quirky one. I don't think a lot of people owned it.
Yeah.
But I have fond memories, specifically of the main character on the front there, who was particularly cool to play as, and he was a big beefy dude. He was one of the ones.
He does look badass.
He's one of the ones you race towards. Later on, after we recorded, I'll show you if you want to see it. It is a good fun game.
Not going to lie, a lot of these games are tempting me to convince you to have a little go afterwards.
Yeah, we should do. Yeah, so not a lot to say about Mace the Dark Age, just one that a friend had that we played a lot of multiplayer on. And again, a lot of this, as you've probably noticed now, is centering around the ability to play together.
Yeah.
And so much of my memories and my collection is based around multiplayer games.
And I think that's what the console is aimed at, isn't it? With the 4-player possibility and, bring your own controller with your own memory card.
It's very much Nintendo's brand, isn't it? Nintendo's very
yeah.
family-centric, and everything they do is focused around that, and they'll say that, it's part of their ethos, whereas the other consoles do lean more into the narrative-driven single-player games. You get much less of that, at least popular games, on Nintendo. There are Mario and exceptions, of course.
Right.
Where are we going next?
Oh, how are we doing for time first? I don't think we'll get
We're good.
through all
We're
of this.
good. We'll fast track through a couple of these.
Okay.
There's a few of these I've only put in here for very specific reasons.
Here we go. Donkey Kong 64.
Donkey Kong. So I've never played it.
You've never... It's in your collection.
It is in my collection. That's why I left it in there. So Donkey Kong is a very recent purchase for me. I didn't own this one as a kid, and I bought this one because there's a very specific reason. So there is an accessory, and there's another game in here which I'll just pluck out. I'm just going to put that in your hand as well, and we'll talk about it at the same time. Perfect Dark. So Donkey Kong 64 and Perfect Dark both have something in common.
I can't immediately tell what it is.
No, you won't. It's hardware related.
Yeah.
And it's the jumper pack that I mentioned to you off record. So there's an expansion pack that was sold as part of the N64, and there's about 3 or 4 games that actually utilise it. Those are 2.
Yeah.
And it was an upgrade to the hardware of the N64. So on top of the console, there's a small flap. You take that off, and there's a physical expansion pack that you could put, I think there's extra memory into,
Yeah.
or something to that effect. And you required that in order to run these games. So Perfect Dark I had at the time. Me and my brother clubbed together, bought the expansion pack, bought Perfect Dark. It's a spiritual sequel to GoldenEye. So same company, same play style, but it's based on a lady called Joanna Dark, and it's like I think she's like a spy, and it's like a alien conspiracy, and it's a cool game. In fact, they did a sequel to it on the Xbox, and it was rubbish, but they've now they've reinvigorated it recently, and there's a big AAA studio working on a new Perfect Dark for the Xbox, which we'll see in probably a couple of years. But the Donkey Kong 64 is a recent purchase as part of the collection. I do want to sit and play it at some point, but it required the expansion pack. So
Yeah.
I put it in there because I wanted to club the two together and just talk about that interesting kind of late in the life hardware upgrade.
Again, Nintendo thinking ahead about accessories and upgrades and things like that. It's
Yeah.
incredible, really, if you think about it at the time.
I think the challenge was those games came out fairly late in the day, and because the expansion pack wasn't exactly cheap, I think it was something like £20 or £30, maybe more, 40 quid. I can't remember. It wasn't cheap,
Yeah.
and especially as a kid, as I was then, shelling out for that and Perfect Dark, which would in itself been £50-ish, was a lot of money. And although we enjoyed the game, we never really got the use out of the expansion pack beyond that because very few games took advantage of it.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong 64, as I said, one of the others. I can't remember what the other one was. I can only think of 3. I'll have to look it up. I don't know right now.
Awesome. Another accessory. It sounds like it feels like there's a theme across these games. There's always some kind of hint to an additional
I
accessory.
think that might be the last of the accessory specifics, but we'll see. I might be wrong.
Okay.
Where do you want to go next?
Another rare one, I'm sure. Mario Party.
Well, you say that. Pricey, because the Mario Party games that is the very first Mario Party. There's now 8, 9, 10. I don't know how many we're on to now. Interestingly, I think, let me just double check this cartridge. Okay. So this was, we bought this one. This is actually the European cartridge. We bought this on holiday in Florida. We bought it from Toys R Us, and we bought an American cartridge, not thinking at the time or knowing anything about it.
Okay.
Got it home, plugged it in, and of course it didn't work. And we were very lucky at the time that Toys R Us, we went to the UK Toys R Us to explain what happened, and they swapped it.
Wow.
I don't know if you get that now.
No,
obviously
I can
Toys R Us,
imagine
they've
not.
Gone. So that's why that was interesting. But the other reason I put it in there is that Mario Party, obviously now a massive franchise. That's what kicked it all off. They're quite expensive now. Mario Party on almost any of the consoles is a pricey game to get your hands on.
Really?
I don't think there were that many of them made. It wasn't printed and run to the levels that your more traditional mainline Mario games were. Certainly some of the GameCube entries are pricey, and the early Nintendo 64 ones are, because there's few of them. People don't often sell them, and they're really good. The latter versions aren't as good.
What's the game kind of like?
Concept. So it's a board game. So it's a Mario
Right.
board game. So
Okay.
you roll dice, you move around the map. Things will happen depending on the type of spaces you land on, and you're chasing down stars. So the idea is to race your competitors to the stars. Between each dice roll, each round of dice rolls, you do a mini game.
Yeah.
And that then determines coins that you win. You might be able to steal a star off someone. And then the aim is after 10, 20 or whatever the rounds you choose to play are, you see who the winner is. Have you never played a Mario Party?
I haven't.
Oh, there you go.
There's another one that we need to crack out.
Yeah,
Go later.
I've got the N64 version. I've got a few others as well we can look at.
Nice.
Getting down to the dregs now. We've got
are.
5 games left. No,
Do you think
4
we'll get
games
through them
left.
all?
We will. We can do all of these. Yeah.
Okay. Snowboard Kids.
Keep
Wow,
one
this
simple.
looks.
Yeah. So it might seem really cheesy. There was a period on the PlayStation and the N64 where snowboarding games became the big thing. I think this is before Tony Hawk's kind of took the extreme kind of skater boarding kind of
And
genre and
SSX
made
as well.
itself.
I imagine.
SSX came much later. That was PS2, but
Yeah.
so you had like 1080. You had Cool Borders, and this Snowboard Kids is really cheesy. It's quite Japanese in its sort of styling. It's very kid friendly, but actually quite challenging and very addictive. So the reason I put it in there is that it was a game that I had. I did own that one as a kid. That's not my copy, original copy. But it was a simple racing concept. First one down the bottom of the mountain, and you'd race and learn the tracks, and kind of had a Mario Kart like feel to it. The reason I put it in there is I always remember that once you'd done everything, you unlocked this ninja character who was completely overpowered. So all of the characters had different attributes that made them useful, and you had to pick and choose the right one for the event.
Yeah.
Until you unlock the ninja, and then once you had the ninja, you beat everyone hands down because he was like 3 on all of his stats or whatever the scoring mechanisms were. And the problem was you couldn't pick him more than once. So everyone had to have a unique character. If you played 4-player, unless you
one person's going to beat
collectively
everyone.
agreed no ninja, then everyone, you're always going to lose. That person would always win. And I remember thinking that was the first time I remember a game being fundamentally broken by one of its characters.
Yeah.
Because
Just having one OP character to ruin
completely
the game.
OP. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the only reason that's in there.
Oh, fair
There
enough.
is a sequel. I own that as well, and it's now bloody expensive to buy. That wasn't too bad, but to get the sequel, because it's so much rarer, it's crazy expensive.
Nice. Okay, next one, F-Zero X.
So I am
Just
not
the one thing I'm noticing about this is much heavier than the others for some reason.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why. Maybe there's something hidden in it.
It's a very powerful game. This one.
So F-Zero, I'm not 100% sure I ever played this as a kid. So I had F-Zero on the Super Nintendo for sure. I recently bought F-Zero GX on the GameCube, which I definitely owned. Not 100% convinced that I own this, but I've definitely played it in my youth. So I think it might have been a friend that owned this one. My memories of this one aren't as strong. I put it in there because it's quite a difficult one to get hold of. All of the F-Zero games seem to be quite expensive to collect. Wasn't crazy, but more than some of these other games. And I just put it in there for that reason, really, because I wasn't quite sure where my memory sat with this one. But if you've never played F-Zero, it's kind of very similar to Wipeout. It's kind of space-based racing, super quick, extreme on the sort of speed side, really quite difficult as well. If you've played Smash Brothers and you're familiar with the character Falcon, Falco Punch, that's where he comes from.
Oh, okay.
So it makes no sense because he's a racing driver and he's in a fighting
He
game.
doesn't punch.
Whatever. Yeah. So there's a bit of vehicle combat in there, not to the degree of Mario Kart and things like that. It was really more about your racing speed and you could bash into other cars and stuff. But,
Very cool.
It's a series that's kind of died away. They've not brought one out since the GameCube. So GX is the last time an F-Zero game was made.
Oh.
And yet they're very popular, which is why I think they hold their price, because you can't experience them on modern consoles.
Yeah, it's kind of the last of its kind.
Yeah. 2 to go. Where are we going?
Right.
Oh,
Diddy Kong Racing. So the picture on the front looks like a baby version of Donkey Kong.
it's Diddy Kong is related to Donkey Kong.
Oh.
So Diddy Kong is in a lot of the games.
Yeah,
It's a much smaller version. So Diddy Kong Racing, many people will argue, is better than Mario Kart.
Really?
I am not one of those people. I firmly believe Mario Kart is better. Diddy Kong has, as well as all the versus mode you expect from Mario Kart, has got an adventure mode. It's very, very similar to Mario Kart in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Has a similar look and feel. It's all centered around the Donkey Kong universe and the characters within it. So you don't see like Mario and stuff like that. It's very much Diddy Kong and his clan. I didn't own it as a kid. I bought it as part of my collection to try it out and to see whether or not these reports were true. I haven't played enough of it to give you any kind of meaningful feedback, and I think this nostalgia will be too strong either way. So I can't see me agreeing that Mario Kart is worse than Diddy Kong Racing, but for a lot of people, it's considered to be the superior racing game on that console. So I thought I'd just put it in there.
They haven't really brought another version out, have they?
That's the only one.
The only one.
There's never been another Diddy Kong Racing.
Interesting.
Obviously, on other consoles, you had like Crash Bandicoot and Crash Team Racing.
Yeah, I was going to say Crash Team
Racing and stuff like that. It kind of fits in that bucket.
Yeah.
It's a wannabe Mario Kart.
Looks a bit like that.
A lot of people will say it's better, so I'll get a lot of hate in the comments for that from people who believe that that one might be superior.
Okay.
It's not. The last game.
Star Wars.
Slightly anticlimactic.
Racer.
Slightly anticlimactic. I suppose we probably should have collated the order, but. So this one again, I rented this as a child, didn't own it as a child, paid not a lot for it as an adult, but it's really popular, and it's a racer, as the name suggests. It's based on the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, specifically the Phantom Menace and the pod racing concept within it. It's a high-speed racer, a little bit F-Zero-y, but with all your favourite Star Wars characters, and it was really popular back in the day. They've recently brought it to Switch as part of like an arcade collection.
Oh, really?
So you could buy it as a sort of standalone. But I wanted to own the original N64 game that I'd played as a kid. There were actually I've got some really good memories of Star Wars games on the Nintendo 64, and that was one of them. There was another one. I don't know that it was called Battlefront. I think it was called Battlefront, but I'm also mindful that is the more recent first-person shooter title for the Star Wars.
It was the older ones as well.
I do think it was Battlefront. I remember similarly renting that. There was actually that game store I mentioned earlier that I bought Lilac Wars from, and this is another thing from the period, because these things were expensive. You could go into this shop and you could pay them for like an hour on a game.
Oh, really? Like a bit like an arcade?
Yeah, a little bit like an arcade, and they'd got an N64 set up. You chose the game you wanted to play.
Yeah.
You paid a couple of quid, and then you could go and stand there and play it for a period of time. And I remember playing, not that game, but the other Star Wars I mentioned. I think it was Battlefront, and I remember shooting stormtroopers. I remember it being like in snow. I remember thinking that was really cool. And I think I rented it further down the line for home play. But that was my one and only experience of going into a store and paying to play in the store.
Yeah.
And I remember it must have stuck with me, because for quite a long time in my 20s, I kind of harboured this idea that I would, if I won the lottery or could somehow start my own business, that what I would do, not necessarily for profit, would be to open up a games kind of cafe where you could come in and do exactly that. You bought a drink, had a coffee or whatever, bought a beer, and paid to play the latest games with your mates on various consoles. And a lot of that, I think, came from that experience. But I don't know.
It's quite a popular idea at the moment. I've seen a lot of like arcade bars.
Yeah. Well, I think just mixing up the sort of pub scene, isn't it? And not everyone now is, probably a good thing, is as wedded to getting smashed and drinking excessively. So I think people now are more interested in experience.
Yeah.
I went to a similar like arcade lounge myself about a month ago, and had a really good experience, bizarrely playing things that I've got here. So it was a bit, I said to my wife, we were like, this is great fun and I'm enjoying the neon environment, and but we could have done this at home, because I've got that much of it. But it was a really great experience all the same, and they got some really old classic arcade units. You can probably see just out of shot maybe that there's a Turtles arcade cabinet over Robbie's shoulder. That's an arcade one-up machine. It's not an original, but I got to play again the original. That had sort of become such a big part of my youth, stepping into arcades.
Excellent. So we've gone through all the games. I guess to close it out, which one is your favourite out of the one that we've been through? To put you on the spot.
We didn't talk about doing that. That's really tricky. I would probably say Mario Kart 64.
Yeah.
I think there's a number there that I would wrestle between. I'm looking at the pile on the floor. GoldenEye is obviously up there. I just don't think it holds up as well now. It doesn't play as well now. So that one, that's the reason I ruled that out. Ocarina of Time I love, but it's not pick up and play.
Yeah.
And I've got firm memories, but again, it's been superseded by better games. I still think Mario Kart 64 holds up, and you can plug it in today and play against anyone and you'll have a good time. So for me, I think it's probably Mario Kart 64.
Nice.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we'll close it there. So that's all we have time for on this episode of Generations Apart. Check us out on all good podcasting services, and check us out on YouTube at Jay and Robbie. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.